All my instincts told me not to when I entered the conference room on Thursday afternoon. When Marcus, the COO, gave me that too bright, tight-lipped smile, Sylvia didn't look up from her phone, and Darren shuffled uncomfortably in his chair. I knew something wasn't right. However, Harper and I made eye contact. Her back was straight, her red-lipped sneer was like a blade, and her well-groomed fingers were arranged in front of her as if she had already won a game of chess. She was already sitting at the head of the table. "Jonas," she said, in a composed yet shortened tone. "Happy you were able to make it. Was there anything I could do?" I pulled out the seat across from her and inquired half-jokingly. Harper didn't chuckle. Not one of them did. She nodded toward the huge folder in front of her, which I immediately recognized, and started, "We've reviewed your division's performance over the last 2 quarters. I had spent 3 weekends creating the operations summary, which I had sent to her immediately. It was a comprehensive product plan for our security infrastructure's 2nd generation, and it was being used against me by her. I will be straightforward," she declared. "We're reorganizing. We are disbanding the threat systems team as of right now. You are losing your job." The words didn't land for a moment. Return. "Jonas, you've worked for the company for over 7 years. We also appreciate the contributions you have made. However, we have made the decision to choose a different course." Another course. I glanced at the table below. Harper was the only one who would look me in the eye. She looked at me as if she were challenging me to talk or to cause a commotion. That's when I knew this wasn't a money issue. It wasn't a reorganization. It was a personal matter. "Let me guess," I responded softly. "By the end of the week, you will announce a new vice president of systems security. Let me guess as well that person's name ends in Arpercade and begins with the letter H." Darren cleared his throat. Sylvia moved once more. Harper, however, did not recoil. Her smile deepened as she remarked, "Jonas, you've always had a creative mind. But you don't see. It takes more than just ideas to be a leader. It has to do with execution, politics, and trust. Politics." That was the crux of the matter. I had a quick look at the tabletop folder. Every element, including my design and vision, as well as the layered access control that I had only discussed in draft form during one-on-one meetings, had been replicated by her. The stillness that envelops a coup was heavy in the air between them. Standing, she stated, "HR will get in contact with you regarding your severance. You have until 5 o'clock to get your belongings organized." My mind racing, I stood too, more slowly than I wanted to. Despite how nasty it sounded, I said, "You're making a mistake. You're taking control of something that 6 months ago you didn't even believe in, Jonas." She murmured, her voice now tinged with venomous sugar. "I always thought it was a good concept. Simply put, I didn't think you were qualified to be its leader." Silently, I walked out of the meeting room. Before I even got to my desk, I heard a Slack ping on my phone, "Access denied." The IT guy was there to oversee my logout, as if I were a shamed intern when I arrived at my office. He appeared uneasy. I didn't provide any consolation to him. I packed slowly instead. Consciously. I left the sticky notes behind. Took pictures of the whiteboard. Harper once made fun of me for carrying a leather notebook, which I grabbed. "Who still writes in pen?" She rolled her eyes as she said it. Everything she hadn't seen was inside. Not the road maps, not the architecture, the breadcrumbs. The silent path I had begun to take when I first became aware of discrepancies. Unexpected praise for my efforts. Unexpectedly, one-on-one meetings that coincided with important client demos were rescheduled. Harper made the strange linguistic error of repeating words I had exclusively used during private brainstorming sessions. I had observed. I simply hadn't spoken yet. I didn't feel angry as I walked out of the building. I had a clear feeling, like a cloak I should have removed long ago. The burden of 7 years fell from my shoulders. I also sensed something else, like the breath before a storm, but quieter and colder. The boardroom was hers. However, I had created the system. Additionally, I was familiar with every line of code back-end credential and contract hidden in procurement paperwork. For the time being, she may use my title. However, she was unaware of what she had actually taken, and I was going to demonstrate to her the exact consequences of that error logically, legally, and without error. Some people believe that betrayal is abrupt and quick, like a dagger to the back, but for me it wasn't like that. It was slower for me, like water leaking beneath a door you were unaware was ajar. Initially, it only dampens the floor, which is a little inconvenience that you can wipe off with a towel. Additionally, it's too late by the time you discover the wall rot. Harper was that person. We were a 10-person team when I started working for Strat Defense, renting half a floor in a downtown office with peeling drywall and a dollar-eating vending machine. I was 26, just out of graduate school, hungry, and of course, dumb. After a year of working as a junior systems analyst, I had redesigned half of our security stack and gained the CTO's respect. I spoke up when no one else would stay late and took notes when no one asked me to. Harper, who was taken from a financial business that failed, joined 2 years after me. Everyone knew she was being prepared for leadership, even if her badge stated she was a strategic consultant when she first arrived. Harper is always one of those people. I'll give her credit for being intelligent. She was quick-witted, sharp-tongued, and skilled at making you feel significant long enough to obtain what she needed. The type of individual who, after laughing too much at the CEO's jokes, inevitably ends up in the picture with trembling hands. We got along for a time. She would casually comment on how visionary I was, stop by my desk for technical clarifications, and solicit my opinion during meetings. Not in a political sense. I had never been good at reading between the lines. When someone smiled at me, I thought they meant it. I made that error. It began modestly. A leadership deck slide that uses one of my models without giving me credit. Then I co-authored a white paper, and all of a sudden my name was missing. The worst thing, when I asked, she didn't deny it. Simply grinned and remarked, "Jonas, you're now a part of the larger picture. You ought to be proud." I didn't feel proud. I was furious. But I remained silent and continued to create. I believed that if I put forth enough effort, she might stop viewing me as a threat and begin to view me as a partner. Rather, she saw my silence as consent. I spent 3 years developing a multi-layered real-time proprietary threat detection technique that no one else in the business had yet to imagine. It was good, and I dubbed it HiveLock, military-grade encryption, flexible framework, and clean code. It was my child. Harper described the pitch deck as promising after glancing at it. She only said that. She was elevated to the position of VP of Strategic Security the following month. Not a warning. Thank you, but no. Only a picture of her trembling hands with the CTO and an email sent to the entire organization. This was the first time I truly experienced the slow squeezing sensation in my chest, when you realize someone is using your bricks to build their home. I kept my head down, though. She can steal credit, but she can't duplicate the core, I reasoned. She has no idea how HiveLock functions in reality. All she saw was the surface. I didn't disclose the design's most important layer. In my mind. She laughed in that leather notepad. I got insurance because of the journal. From then on, I began recording everything. Gatherings, memories, Slack conversations, logs of access, and branches of code. I have a timestamp and a commit record if someone even copied and pasted a function I wrote. Not because I intended to use it, but just because I had a gut feeling that I might need to prove I wasn't insane at some point. It wasn't simply the labor either. I also took notes on her habits. Before product reviews, she would arrange pre-meetings with decision makers. The manner in which she would discuss my communication issues with HR in private. She always ended up on the winning side of arguments by playing both sides. She had a case to make, A lengthy, slow, painstaking one, portraying me as intelligent yet unpredictable. A danger, a drawback. Someone too hazardous to promote, but too valuable to fire outright. She was intelligent. However, it was careless. She neglected to remove the metadata from an email she sent one day with feedback on the performance of my team. 3 weeks before the actual performance audit, an outside legal consultant had altered the document. I realized it then. She wasn't merely arranging herself. She was putting me in danger. So I made adjustments. In silence, I transferred the private Hivelock files to a personal drive. Is it legal indeed? Harper hadn't looked at the fine print, but I had added a condition to my job contract when it was being renewed 2 years earlier. Unless otherwise agreed in writing, any technology created by an employee on their own time, using non-company equipment, remained their intellectual property. That was an agreement I had never signed. I got to work creating backups. Old prototypes were quietly removed from the common repository. I just modified the remarks, eliminated identifiers, and rendered them unintelligible to those unfamiliar with the architecture, not deleted. I didn't damage the house's exterior. However, I stole the foundation plumbing and electrical. Meanwhile, I went along with it. In meetings, I began complimenting Harper. When she claimed credit, she nodded, allowing her to think I was backing off, allowing her to believe I was helpless. I anticipated the layoffs when they started in Q1. I was able to complete the 3rd-generation prototype because of her. Only long enough to walk it into a demo with 2 private equity companies and 3 federal clients. Only long enough to finish the board presentation, which had all the graphics, but no content. Then across the table, she gave me that lovely smile and instructed me to get my belongings. She was unable to understand that the 3rd-generation demo was simply a demo. The essential features were removed. The information was fictitious. And the real functioning model, which included active response layers and military-grade protocol hooks, was still on my encrypted offline server. It was connected to a separate shell corporation that I had set up 2 years prior under a different name. She had appropriated my title. Not the job, though. Not the possession. Certainly not the evidence. I refrained from screaming. I refrained from arguing. I refrained from crying. Like a man walking into daylight, I nodded to the security guy, picked up my box of belongings, and left the premises. I didn't even turn around. She believed she had buried me. She only cleared the stage, though. Documents, code logs, timestamps, and the one condition in my contract that she was unaware of were all in my possession now. Harper might have been a better player. However, I constructed the board, and I took the next step. One of my former devs, Amir, called me 3 days after they walked me out. After 4 years of collaboration, we had a brotherly trust in one another. At first, he asked whether we could have coffee off-site without saying anything more. Don't text. No Slack. Simply, are you free to speak? That tone seemed familiar to me. Yes, I replied. Neutral ground, an old cafe by the train station, was where we met. The scent of bacon grease and burnt toast was more authentic than anything I had detected in the Strat defense offices for years. Amir, who appeared exhausted, sank into the booth across from me. Not the kind of fatigue that can be cured by sleep, but rather the fatigue that results from bearing a burden for too long. With his eyes fixed on the chipped tabletop, he said without preamble, "She's rewriting your code." I didn't wince. I simply took a drink of my coffee. She is now referring to it as Sky Trace, claims that it was created totally in accordance with her idea and is a logical progression of Hivelock. She is allegedly launching it under her name, now that you are no longer with her, having started it when you were still in charge. Slowly, I nodded. Is it functioning? Once he made a small, sour laugh. Jonas, it's broken. The architecture is half broken. Live breaches are 5 seconds ahead of the threat recognition module. Investors are already asking questions, but the board is still in the dark. I realized Harper had overplayed her hand at that point, because she had taken charge of something she didn't comprehend, not merely claimed credit. She mistook the merchandise for the code. The system, the design language, and the way one function interacted with the others, like gears in a machine, however, were the actual product. Without recognizing that the engine was still mine, she disassembled it for parts. Amir leaned in front. She has begun to claim that you left due to poor performance, that you lacked stability, allegations that you attempted to disrupt the third-generation prototype. It was there, the smear of a character. In a sense, it made sense. Unless I was the antagonist, her story wouldn't make sense. Instead of stealing from someone you trust, you make them a danger. Give the impression that you saved the project from them. I muttered. I assumed it was something along those lines. I have logs, Amir declared. Screenshots, copies of your timestamp-tagged commits. I made a backup of everything the day you departed. My chest constricted. Not out of rage, with appreciation. Why, I inquired. He gave a shrug. Because I observed her behavior the moment you left. Additionally, I dislike being a part of a deception. I had more than just a backup disk when I left that diner. I departed with certainty, because I now had 3 things: evidence that I was the owner, evidence that she had stolen, and most importantly, evidence that she had lied. However, that wasn't the only thing that came together that week. A man named Devin called me 3 days later. We first met years ago when I spoke on decentralized threat mapping at a cybersecurity conference in Washington, D.C. He now led a firm with a small staff, good capital, and a focus on the identical technology I had developed with Hivelock. He wanted to know what it meant that my name was mentioned as a former lead architect in a Strat Defense press release on Skytrace. So I told him, everything openly, quietly, and with supporting documents. When I was done, he said, "Let me get this straight. You constructed the core. You never signed an IP transfer. The architecture is yours. And she's out there attempting to sell government clients a shattered knockoff." "Yes," I said. "That pretty much sums it up." A pause occurred. "Then, Jonas, would you think about welcoming Hivelock as a product of your own investors in our company? Would be thrilled to see anything similar fall under the proper heading." I promised to give it some thought. And I did. I spent 2 evenings sitting in my flat with the lights off, gazing out at the city, as if it were my first time seeing it. I continued calculating the numbers and reenacting the events. I might file a lawsuit. I had a case. However, litigation is messy, drawn out, and noisy. Or I might do something Harper didn't anticipate. A surgically controlled flip. Use facts to expose the untruth, not rage. While truth travels more slowly than rumors, it strikes with greater force when it does. So, I got to work getting ready. I got in touch with Jenna, an IP lawyer I knew from my time at university. I forwarded the version control logs from my local disks, timestamped prototypes, and the original Hivelock specifications to her. She called me back after searching through them for 2 hours. "Jonas, this is airtight," she said. "The fact that she altered and redistributed it under a different name, in addition to your ownership, not only is that unethical, that is illegal. Would you be able to send a cease and desist?" She chuckled. "I am capable of more. We'll use your LLC to file a provisional patent. Any use of your code after that date is considered infringement, and it legally locks your claim in place." In an instant, the time period was reversed. I was accused of sabotage by her. Every Skytrace update she released, however, became her liability as a result of that filing. I waited nonetheless, because before I could move, I needed one more piece. At the National Cybersecurity Expo, an annual exposition where investors, government clients, and the media come together, Strat Defense was organizing a product reveal. Harper would be the keynote speaker, introducing Skytrace as her creation. A courtroom wasn't necessary for me. A projector was necessary. So I waited. Ready. I put everything on a drive, one folder called Hivelock, another called Chain of Custody, and a third called Unreleased Assets. I had a picture of Harper and me at the 2020 holiday party, standing in front of a Hivelock dev poster I had created along with every demo, and signed timestamp as well as screenshots of Slack messages in which Harper called Hivelock Jonas's baby. She had a radiant smile. I was worn out. Evidence in all its forms. I didn't send anything though. Not quite yet. Because it is not necessary to yell the best truths, the truths that break lies. All they require is the proper lighting. And in 8 days, the industry's largest light would arrive. I would then show her, present the board, present the world, not with malice, not even for retaliation. However, the system only functions when the truth is revealed. Harper, too. She stood at the brink already. I just needed to demonstrate what was beneath her feet. Devin had booked me a hotel room the night before the expo, which was only 2 floors up from the main conference room, where Harper would make her big revelation the following morning. I didn't intend to attend in person. It felt petty at first, dramatic, as if I were playing her game by coming to see her fail. However, the more I considered it, the more I understood that this was not about seeing her lose. Being present when the truth entered through the front door was the key. The presentation folder, the USB discs containing time-stamped archives, and a printed copy of the provisional patent application that Jenna had submitted on my behalf, were all spread out on the bed. Additionally, I have an old leather notebook that is tattered and worn with coffee stains on the corners, and my handwriting in fading blue ink on page after page. Harper always claimed it was sentimental and out of date. However, it contained the truth in a manner that digital data were unable to replicate. You felt the proof in your palms. I was taking that notebook with me. I wore the same gray jacket I had on the day I was dismissed when I entered the convention center at 10:02 a.m. A silent reminder not to her, but to me. Fireworks don't always accompany a full circle. Sometimes it just manifests itself in the quiet, in the serenity you experience during a storm. There were many people in the ballroom. I used to pitch to investors, tech journalists, and government liaisons in back rooms or on Zoom calls at 11 p.m., and there were rows of chairs full of them. They had come for Skytrace, the future of cybersecurity, as its inventor had promised, or so they believed. Harper wore a teal outfit that was probably more expensive than my rent when she took the stage. She launched with a joke about pushing boundaries and breaking molds. The audience chuckled, half listening, taking notes and drinking coffee from branded cups as she flashed that glossy professional smile. I sneaked into a seat by the AV booth at the back. Devin looked back only once when he was seated a few rows ahead. Don't nod. No signal. Simply being prepared. Harper's presentation began. Behind her slides sparkled with catchphrases like proprietary algorithmic structure and adaptive defense, floating in pastel language over glossy designs. With the assurance of someone who genuinely thought she had gotten away with it, I watched her outline my work. Then she said it. Over the course of the last 18 months, our team led by myself and an outstanding team of engineers developed this platform internally. It was created from the ground up to address the increasing cyber threats in defense and enterprise environments. That was the time. The falsehood. Unambiguous. Straightforward. Captured on all microphones and live streams. Devin rose silently at precisely 10:19 a.m. and gave something to the AV tech, a mutual contact from the Expo committee, who had previously lived in the same dorm as Devin at MIT. Not a drama, not a warning, only a silent switch. The Skytrace blueprint suddenly faded on the screen behind Harper. My name was substituted, large, audacious. The font is clean. Hivelock core structure IP patent pending 100%. Authored by Jonas is written underneath it. Her jaw remained open as she paused in the middle of her sentence and turned slightly to read the screen. The throng was enveloped in silence. The following slide, a screencast of my functional prototype from 3 years prior, then started playing automatically. Harper claimed to have developed the same capabilities this year. Identical user interface. The same flow of responses. I would have been the only one to write the code that produced the same internal debug message, read layer ACK. The video's timestamp was February 2021. Her eyes had become blurry as she turned back to face the crowd. Her voice trailed off. This isn't I didn't give the go-ahead. The final slide then appeared. A document that has been scanned. Section 9 of my job contract page, 4, the Personal Intellectual Property Clause, highlighted in yellow. The last sentence summed everything up. Unless specifically transferred in writing, the company forfeits rights to employee-developed intellectual property made after hours using non-company equipment. The audience made a noise that sounded like 100 individuals breathing simultaneously. Harper stopped. At her sides, her hands curled slightly. She searched the room for a lifeline, but she couldn't find one. I got up. Did not approach the stage. I didn't speak loudly. From the rear of the room, he spoke plainly. In 2020, I constructed Hivelock on my own schedule on servers that I own. The business was unable to assert ownership at the time, and is unable to do so today. All of the content used by Skytrace is derived from my original work, and I can verify it with the logs backups and provisional patent. The whispers turned into a commotion. A dozen phones rang. Somebody close to the front began to videotape. Once more. Additionally, Harper did something that people like her never imagine having to do. She went into a panic. Her voice cracked as she replied, "I didn't realize it was still based on your on that code." My group stated, "You claim to have invented it," I remarked. "After firing me for performance issues, you pitched to federal agencies using my prototype. You submitted contracts for software that isn't legally yours. That isn't a misunderstanding. That is deception." At that moment, one of the Strat Defense legal team members, who used to sit through meetings with me and take notes without looking at me, got up. He remained silent. I simply glanced at Harper. Next, at the screen. Then pivoted and departed from the room. One more pause. The AV screen then became black. No music, no outro. Nothing but quiet. After another beat of silence, the room buzzed into overlapping, dispersed whispers as individuals got up, gathered their belongings, and departed the ballroom. Harper remained still on stage, still holding on to the clicker as if it could go back in time. However, the moment had passed. I was met by the door by Devon. "Are you prepared?" With my notebook tucked under one arm, I nodded. Together, we walked out. A man from a federal contract office caught up to us in the hallway. "Are you Jonas Reed?" I gave a nod. "We want to have a conversation. Skytrace is no longer feasible. We still have a strong interest in Hivelock, though." He gave his card to me. I ignored the name altogether. I simply put it in my pocket and continued to walk. I didn't grin, didn't boast. Simply continued to go through the gathering while whispers and turns were made. Not because I was absent this time, but since the truth was finally revealed to them. As we went outdoors, I looked down at the old journal. Harper once spilled coffee on the corner during a pitch meeting, leaving it worn. It's funny how things that make people laugh may outlive them. Strat Defense's stock had already fallen 6% by the time we arrived in the parking lot. Additionally, it was just 11:08 a.m. That night, I didn't rejoice. No rooftop party, no ego parade, and no champagne were present. It was just me sitting on my apartment's balcony with a notebook in my lap, watching the city lights blink like sluggish, dark thoughts. It was a cool wind. Keep quiet. I enjoyed the silence. I didn't feel proud of Harper's demise. I didn't even feel good about it. It simply gave me a sense of stability, as if a burden I had been carrying for years had finally fallen to the ground and was no longer mine. The news had spread before dawn. The national media grabbed on after tech blogs published it first, with headlines like CEO caught pitching stolen code and Skytrace implodes in real time at Expo. Terms such as infringement, breach of contract, and federal fraud became prominent, and my name was there standing by itself, no longer connected to her. Hivelock was created by Jonas. It was odd. I had been buried under someone else's identity for a very long time. All of a sudden, I was no longer the difficult engineer, the unstable lead, or the guy who couldn't handle the pressure. I was myself. A few days later, I returned to the diner beside the train station. There, I ran across Amir once more. Same coffee, same booth, same smell of burnt toast. A packet containing handwritten letters from several of the junior engineers who had left Strat Defense following the fallout was slid across the table by him. "Thanks for teaching us how to keep receipts," one person commented. "You were right," said another. "We also witnessed it." I remained silent since I was unsure of how to respond to that. Simply folded the letters back up and nodded. 2 weeks later, Devon's team completed the Hivelock acquisition. We reorganized it as ReadLayer Systems, a new company. He offered me the position of CEO. I declined. Claimed that all I wanted was to start building again, noise-free. "Spoken like someone who actually deserves it," he said with a smile. "We made a compromise, CTO. I'm still hands-on, close to the code, and Strat Defense." They fell silent. In order to conduct an internal inquiry, Harper was placed on indefinite leave. Reaffirming integrity, restructuring leadership, and investigating discrepancies were among the business jargon used in their press release, but I understood what they meant. Slowly behind closed doors, they were bleeding out. After the expo, Harper never got back to me directly. She stopped responding to the press, deleted her LinkedIn account, and vanished from social media. She must have heard the silence more loudly than I ever did. However, a manila letter arrived at my door 2 weeks later. No address for return. There was only one page within. A photocopy of our former team's original PowerPoint deck, which was Hivelock's initial board presentation when it was still a dream. At the bottom was a note written in handwriting I hadn't seen in years. Along with my name, "You were certain to prevail." I simply didn't want to be abandoned. No name. Don't apologize. That's all. I put it in the back of my notebook after folding it once and then twice. Not to pardon her, not to overlook her. Just to keep in mind what ambition devoid of morality looks like. Whom you hurt to advance matters. It creates a trail. It can be noisy at times. It can be quiet at times. But somewhere, it always reverberates. I received an invitation to present at a conference a month after the expo. Just a panel on leadership and ethical innovation, nothing fancy. I nearly declined. Then I thought about the interns, junior developers. The people who said, "You were correct." I replied, "Yes." With just a microphone and my voice, I stood in front of a small audience without any slides or graphics. I explained what had transpired. Not the business version, the authentic version, regarding the late hours, the strain, the quiet, the smiles, the lies that leak rather than blow up, and the sensation of saying, "Enough at last." "Would you do it all again?" a person in the audience questioned at the conclusion. Even with the time it took to arrive here. I took a while to respond. I just ran my touch over the aged spine of the leather notebook I was holding. I replied, "I wouldn't want to. However, yes, I would, because it's not always simple to face the reality. However, once it lands, it remains there." A nervous-looking female of maybe 22 approached me after the panel, claimed that she had been forced to decide between speaking up and keeping her job. "How did I know when the timing was right?" she asked. "You don't," I remarked. "You can tell when the silence is no longer shielding you. As if she understood, she nodded. Perhaps she did. I placed the notepad on the top shelf in my read layer office that evening. Not concealed. Merely taking a nap. The business was expanding. There were actual contracts and advancements. Now, Amir was in charge of engineering. Devin and I divide the choices equally. It was a clean culture. Respect was silent but powerful. Not a single sneer. Avoid pitfalls. I still occasionally check the news in the middle of the night. It had been weeks since Harper's name was spoken. The storm moved on. And where did it go? Something substantial. Something was earned. The kind of peace that results from clarity rather than retaliation. From being aware that I spared her. That's what she did alone. I simply created something more robust and turned to leave.